Welcome to Norse Code, the #1 podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. I'm your host and producer. My name is James Pagashnik. Thank you guys so much for listening. And at the other end of the tin cannon string, we have our analyst and co-host. You know him from numerous blogs and podcasts around the internet, most notably from Pro Football Network. He is back from assignment. He is Mr. Useful Human, Arif Hassan. Arif, was it worth it?
What worth it?
The sandwich, the burger that you had at at the Super Bowl. Was it worth it to go through all of the Super Bowl stuff to then have the saddest burger of your life?
I mean, okay, so people net total pay like what, $20,000 to go to the Super Bowl, right? Like, $6,000 ticket, super expensive flight, super expensive, hotel, right? People pay a lot of money to go to the Super Bowl. My cost was obviously some labor I had to write, and also one of the worst burgers I've had outside of a lunchroom cafeteria, and honestly, worse than most of the ones I've had inside a lunchroom cafeteria.
Hospital food.
Yeah.
You posted a picture of it in the Discord, and we were all very concerned for a moment, like that you might have been taken hostage, that something might have gone awry.
Right. Like this is like one of those, like I posted a picture of the food that I thought was actually fairly representative of how quality the burger was. And instead of anybody being like, well, at least it's free, everyone was like, are you doing all right, man? It's like, I'm at the Super Bowl, and people are like, are you okay?
The patty looked like one of those pieces of meat that they cook by slapping it. That's
you mean from the YouTube videos?
It resembled that. It was terrifying. Like nightmare. I'm not saying it was nightmare fuel, but I am saying it was pretty close.
Yeah, it was pretty bad. So would I rather pay $18,000 or do a little bit of work, but also have to eat that burger? And it is tough. But the burger was worth it. Now if we lowered the price to $5,000,
well then
this is different.
Things do change. You're absolutely right. Well, welcome to this episode of Norse Code. Hope you guys are all doing well. Again, this is the off season. We're about every 2 weeks or so. So hope you guys are enjoying yourself in all of the off season splendor of debating amongst yourselves whether or not certain cuts are worth it, whether or not Kirk Cousins is going to get extended, whether or not they're bringing in a special person to work with Kirk that he doesn't like, that sort of nonsense. Welcome to the off season, where everything terrible is reported because there's no other news to talk about. And we'll get into some of that here in just a few minutes, but before we start, again, thank you guys so much for listening to Norse Code. If you enjoy the show and would like to help us financially, you can do so in a couple of different ways. You can go over to patreon.com/Norse Code and check us out there, get some bonus episodes, get access to the Discord. You can get access to the next episode that we're going to release for the Patreon has, amongst other things, Arif's review of a Tesla, which was very entertaining.
And it was entertaining. I also gotta say, I think it was thorough and useful.
In
addition,
we're providing a service here, and this particular episode is going to help you decide whether or not a Tesla is right for you, or whether or not something with that useless of a front boot is going to be good for you. So check it out over at patreon.com/Norse Code. We'll probably release that one in a few days. Special thank you on Patreon to John McCann. Thank you so much for subscribing over there. If you'd like, you can also go to paypal.me/Norse Code as well. That's more for a one-time donation. You can also go to threadless.com, or rather you can go to norsecode.threadless.com and get your Arif merch. You can get the Norse Code shirts, hoodies. You can get yourself a shower curtain and send that to Luke Braun. I think that's the next person who needs to receive one, because Drawplay Dave has his and seems to... well, he hasn't said he's divorced yet, so... Although, proceedings take a long time to happen. They may be separated now, but he hasn't mentioned anything about that. But he has posted how much he loves his wreath shower curtain, and that it has definitely not changed his life for the absolute worst. Probably.
I mean, it is his art, right? Like, she has to have some begrudging
right. Respect for it.
No, I wouldn't say that. I think you know how over time you build up a tolerance to like caffeine. I'm just, to pick something familiar to me. I have to drink or consume, I guess, more caffeine than I did 10 years ago because I keep consuming caffeine in larger and larger quantities.
Is that what you tell yourself as you steal the photographer's Red Bull?
Okay. Full story of the Patreon. But okay, I don't think I stole anybody's Red Bull.
It was community Red Bull. It just happened to be in their fridge.
I am not saying I had a legal entitlement to that drink that I took from the fridge, but I wouldn't say it was any specific person's Red Bull at that point. So
well, no. Plus the Luke Braun mask you were wearing at the time probably made things a bit easier to do.
Well, anybody could have been wearing that mask. Based on Luke Braun's recent tweets, it could have been Luke Braun.
It very well could have. And with that, let's get into this episode of Norse Code. So it is in fact the off season, and there's been a lot to talk about as far as the defense of the Minnesota Vikings, which was atrocious last year, especially in the playoff game against the Giants. And while the Giants are trying to figure out just how much to pay a man who had his best game of his career against the worst defense in the in the playoffs, the Minnesota Vikings defense needs to be rebuilt. And there's probably a number of ways that this can happen.
One could argue that it needs to be built. But yeah,
built first, yes, and anything after that, new paint job or anything else, we can deal with afterwards. But it needs something they need something to build on. They need something to exist as opposed to whatever happened against Daniel Jones. So where do you start rebuilding the defense? And did the presser give you any ideas as to where this is going to go?
So the presser, I think, told us a lot of things that we have kind of understood about the way the New England defense has been organized for a couple of years, in that there is an intent to somewhat transplant that into Minnesota. Now, obviously, we've seen examples of that go sideways, going all the way back to Romeo Crennel in Houston, to obviously Matt Patricia in Detroit. That doesn't always work. But with Brian Flores in Miami, it did work. There was a lot of similar principles, but the really important and interesting thing about those New England defenses that have been really good over the years, 2019 is one of the best examples I can think of recently, is that there has been a lot of game plan specific stuff that they do. So there are examples like during the Super Bowl run where they teed off against the Rams, basically, where they built together a game plan that they never used for the rest of the year. They hadn't used for the previous rest of the year. And they basically signed somebody like Danny Shelton to the roster just for that game, right? Because they knew without Todd Gurley, with CJ Anderson on the roster, they could not run outside zones. They had an inside zone run stopper in Danny Shelton. Just for that game, it worked out really beautifully, right? But in other games, they're playing a ton of man coverage, blitzing a lot. And some other games are playing a fair amount of zone. And some other games are playing a lot of man match. They're building a lot off of Nick Saban principles in his defense. But, sometimes they have someone like an Eric Rowe, whose only job is to erase receiving tight ends with a receiving specific skill set. And then they don't even make him active for other games, right? So to me, the way these defenses are built is there's kind of a vision of what you want your toolbox to look like, right? There's an understanding of, hey, this is the project we're working on. We're going to need these tools to build that project. But the toolbox has space. If we can bring in other tools to add to the toolbox that we think could be useful in this project, we're going to do it. Maybe we don't use that tool. Maybe we do. But it's nice to have that in case, let's say for the Super Bowl, we need to add a player that's specifically good at this one thing for this game plan against this opponent that we haven't seen all year, right? So The defense, I think, is going to have a lot of players with a lot of different skill sets that'll allow them to build this toolbox or to build this project out of the toolbox that they have available to them. But that does still mean that there's a general tendency. So, the Matt Patricia, Romeo Crennel, Bill Belichick, Gerard Mayo, these defenses do all have a tendency towards man coverage and specifically off man coverage. They have a tendency towards blitzes and specifically blitzes from the linebacker position, although you have somebody like a Harrison Smith, you have somebody like a Mike Hilton. You're probably going to use them in a capacity that takes advantage of their skill set. So you'll have defensive back blitzes, but primarily you'll have some linebackers that are pretty good at getting to the quarterback from the second level. And you'll have a versatile array. I already used the word versatile to describe the defense as a whole, but I think it specifically applies to the defensive line. A versatile array of defensive linemen. Some can two gap. And Harrison Phillips can two gap. He can one gap. He can two gap. Some can only one gap, which the Vikings currently don't have a lot of those on the roster. It's a lot of two gappers, despite the fact that it was a one gap defense last year. And some can, take advantage of what the rest of that defensive line is doing. So, for example, one of the things that I found really interesting when I was reading, I think it's The Art of Smart Football by Chris Brown, which is the sequel to Chris B. Brown, not, the singer.
Yeah.
The Art of Smart Football, which I think is the sequel to Smart Football, the book, is he describes in it a defense that is a hybrid 4-3-3-4, which I want to call back to because Flores said in the presser when he was asked, is it going to be a 3-4 defense still? He said it's going to be game plan specific, but it is a 3-4. That kind of tells me that there's probably going to be some movement there if it kind of helps them, but they'll build the defense from a 3-4 look and then add pieces that will allow them to do some 4-3 stuff. Danielle Hunter, for example, has historically been better in the 4-3 than the 3-4. I don't think it matters as much as people say it does. So Darius Smith is a 3-4 kind of guy, right? But the way that in that book that it's described that there was kind of an innovation from the Bill Belichick defenses is that Vince Wilfork was a fulcrum point for how that defense was organized. And to one side of him, it would be a one-gapping defense. And to the other side, it would be a two-gapping defense. And that doesn't just apply to the defensive ends and the nose tackle. It also applies, obviously, to the outside linebacker, but also the inside linebacker, the off-ball linebacker behind them. He would play as if he's a two-gapper. Which means that he'll read and react a little bit more. He'll take advantage of the fact that the defensive lineman is going to occupy a gap based on how he reads. So initially the defensive lineman is going to say attack the guard, and then if the running back moves into one gap, he'll move the guard into the other gap so he can occupy the gap that the running back is attacking, which then cues the linebacker to pay attention to the backside that the guy just got rid of, or fill to the front side and occupy a gap to the outside. So there's a read and react element, whereas the one gapping linebacker has a gap, right? And that's the one he's going to attack and pay attention to. So that created obviously a lot of problems for offenses attempting to game plan around this. And I see that there is a possibility potentially to do something like that with Harrison Phillips, and maybe Kai Tonga. I don't know. But if you do that, then you're going to want somebody who can stunt and loop a lot, right? And one thing that they did a lot with their defensive fronts, both then and now, is make sure that their defensive linemen can cross multiple gaps and get upfield. It doesn't emphasize the twisting and stunting as much as some of the other defenses around the NFL, but it does it a ton. And so you're going to want, a player with a lot of lateral agility. And how the Vikings kind of determine that, I don't know. Luke mentioned on the Minnesota Football Party that it might be through explosiveness because you want a first step that gets you across that gap really quickly. To me, I think a 3-cone might play a role here too, just in terms of like workout metrics that might correlate to this particular skill set. And so that is kind of how you might want to build that front. And now that we know that they didn't work out a deal with Dalvin Tomlinson, his deal has officially voided. The Vikings are in the market for 1 or 2 defensive linemen instead of just 1, right? And that might mean taking a 1-gapper, right? Or it could mean taking a 2-gapper and hoping that Sezio Demewo can do some 1-gap stuff or do some gap jumping stuff, or I don't know. or James Lynch becomes a one gapper again, despite kind of the weird history he's had with the Vikings, the fact that he stuck around this long, despite not being good at any one thing, but being all right at a couple of things that they ask him to do. That's cool. I see Deron Payne just got franchise tagged, otherwise he'd be a really stellar signing. But it could be like a Dramont Jones from the Broncos. He's coming off of not a great year, but he's had a strong history of production. Zach Allen is coming off a phenomenal year with the Arizona Cardinals, and there is he seems like the kind of guy that would fit this style of defense. Let's see. I'm going through a couple of these. I'm looking at the PFF free agency list right now. Sheldon Rankins, if you can because he did not have a great year in 2021, coming off of an injury, I think, in New Orleans. No, coming off an injury in New Orleans, he was with the Jets. But in 2022, he did all right, with the acknowledgement that the Jets had an insane defensive line, and maybe he benefited from that. Morgan Fox would be an interesting kind of versatile player that can fit into some kind of interesting schemes. This is a pretty strong, like the top end of it is not amazing. Assuming like Javon Hargrave retires and, the top, according to PFF, now that Deron Payne has been franchised, is probably Dalvin. But this is a pretty strong middle tier of interior defenders, and grabbing one of these guys that has experience in both systems or seems to have a skill set that'll allow them to have something in both systems, that would make a lot of sense to me. But like that is kind of what you're looking for up front. I think, again, the cornerback stuff, you want off-man coverage, but you want players that are capable at some of these other tasks. And maybe that means, some games you're not going to have your best man coverage defender playing a ton of snaps because it's a zone game. But I think that means making sure that you bring Duke Shelley back, which I think is trivially easy for the Vikings. And maybe they already did it and I missed a report on that. But, it means going into, taking a look at, maybe passing on a Marcus Peters, who I think would be a fantastic get. I'm not saying that they shouldn't get him, but maybe passing on a Marcus Peters to see if you can get some versatility out of somebody who's from that system, Jonathan Jones or Nick Needham. I've mentioned them before. Or taking a look at like... Jamel Dean has played both inside and outside. I think he's probably going to be too expensive, but taking a look at somebody like that, and seeing, hey, he's played both man zone, he's played man match and zone match, he's played a bunch of different stuff, but he has been particularly special in off man coverage for the Buccaneers. So I think that taking a look at those core qualities and then expanding out to players that have that capability, I think would be good. I know some people have talked about moving on from Eric Kendricks, which would mean taking a look at linebackers in free agency that might have that skill set. I don't think they should move on from Kendricks. I think the Kendricks-Asamoah linebacker group right now is a pretty good one, but they should go after someone like a Leo Chenal, right, who was just drafted by the Bills from Wisconsin. Not the Bills. I remember this because Victoria wanted him to be drafted by the Bills, and he played an outsized role in the Super Bowl for the Chiefs. But, he played kind of a Donta Hightower-ish role. Not many snaps, but, in the Super Bowl he did. In having a guy that is a pretty good run defender, great at blowing up fullbacks and phenomenal at blitzing, they've always had somebody that's been pretty good at blitzing, right? Whether that is like a Jamie Collins or a Donta Hightower or a Gerard Mayo. They've always had someone that's been pretty good at blitzing, and they don't have to be one of your two starting linebackers in order for that to be kind of the case. I think you probably want one of those. Eric Kendricks is all right at blitzing, but I think you want your third guy to be that guy. And I don't know that that's going to be near the top of any free agency list. I think maybe Drew Tranquil, maybe Kaiser White. But for the most part, you're probably not going to find that guy. They can maybe make a use out of, like, say, a Denzel Perryman, who, kind of disappointed for the Chargers, but has done all right for the Raiders. And keep both Kendricks and Asamoah as your two primary inside linebackers. But yeah, I think that thinking of the defense, not in terms of the scheme that it prefers to run, but as one that has a core set of principles that it will expand out from game to game, is probably the best way to think about their player acquisition strategy, which is going to make their draft really interesting to evaluate.
And with the 23rd, technically 24th, but with the 23rd pick, this isn't something that you're able to really get anyone in particular. This is something that somebody falls, or this is something that you use to trade back. So if the Vikings end up trading back, how much does that change the strategy?
I don't think necessarily too much, and we do have to be kind of careful. We always talk about trading back a lot. I think every fan base does, but it is Kwesi, right? It is the Vikings. I mean, the Vikings trade back. Rick Spielman traded back.
And it is Kwesi.
Traded back a lot.
It is Kwesi. It could go to somebody in the division.
Right, exactly. There's no limits, right? He sees a good opportunity, he'll take it, even if the market didn't really love that opportunity. But yeah, so I don't think that changes things too much. It might be, and I know there's a listener question in here that's kind of related to what I'm about to say, but it might just be they perceive bands of defensive talent or a cliff in talent. And you've either passed it or you're at the beginning of one, so you might as well trade back a little and let somebody fall to you. But I don't think that there's going to be too much of a change. The cornerback group here is, now that I'm doing these like kind of updating consensus boards, we're going to release one. So I've already released two, one basically partway through the season, the college season, and then one at the end of the college season, before the All-Star games. We're going to release another one before the NFL Combine. And then whenever it makes sense after the Combine, probably after a lot of pro days have rolled in, and then a final one before the draft. Now that I'm keeping track of like all of these, the movement that we're seeing among all these players, one thing I've noticed is that the cornerback group is actually really hard to pin down. The top cornerback keeps changing. So that, first of all, that's pretty interesting. And it's not like a Derek Stingley, Sauce Gardner kind of thing where you're changing among two people that in most classes would just be number one. There's a bunch of people that in a lot of classes might vie for number one, but it's not, you don't have an elite lockdown corner here. So it's between Kele Ringo and Christian Gonzalez, and now I'm seeing Devin Witherspoon being pushed all the way to the top. There's a lot of cornerbacks in this class that could be near the top. I know some people think that Clark Phillips is the best corner in the class, but he's 5'10", probably. We'll know at the Combine for sure. But he's like 5'10", so maybe he's a slot guy. But he might go in the first round anyway, right? Like nobody wants to miss out on Antoine Winfield Jr. or Senior, I guess. And so it's the possibility that they could go after that. But there's a ton of guys that seem to be potentially picked, 7th to 12th or whatever, right? Or a ton of guys that could be picked in that 20 range. And so if the Vikings have a particular ordering in mind of that cornerback group for their system, right, they could say, hey, Christian Gonzalez is out. That's unfortunate. He was kind of our number one with a bullet, so we're not going to trade up. So now that we've got all these other guys, we've got two people in the second tier, but we're not going to trade up. They're both gone. Now we've got the third tier. So we could either take the guy we like the most in the third tier, or we could grab another third round pick, fifth round pick, whatever, and grab the guy that we like basically as much at the end of that third tier of cornerbacks. And I think that that's probably going to happen if they do want to take a cornerback first. Again, another thing to keep in mind, and we say this basically every year, but if a team has a need at a position, we don't necessarily have to be upset if that is not the thing they pick first, right? Even if it is clearly their top need, like a cornerback, right? Like if they grab a linebacker, first of all, I don't know what that would say about Brian Asamoah, but maybe it says something about Eric Kendricks long term. But if they grab a linebacker, that doesn't mean they're not going to grab a cornerback later, right? That doesn't mean they're not going to grab a receiver later. So we have to remember the draft is multiple rounds, but we end day one with only one round. So it could change those things, but I think primarily we're going to see a lot of defensive picks in the third to fifth round. A lot of the really great defenses that the Patriots have been built in that third to fifth round range. I think if I remember correctly, Jamie Collins, for example, I just mentioned him. It's like a third rounder. A lot of these guys have not come in the first round. The Patriots cornerback group right now, which I think other people besides me have started calling Jonestown, which is good. I like that this truly awful nickname has taken hold.
That's not dark at all.
Well, I mean, it's only dark if there's a massacre, right? But okay. So like the reason I'm calling it that, Marcus Jones, Jack Jones, Jonathan Jones, are all New England cornerbacks. that have all played a significant rotation for them. That whole group, Marcus Jones is a third rounder, and he's like kind of a special teams pick. Jack Jones is a fourth rounder. I know a lot of people thought he might have gone in the fifth round because, there's some questions about, is there off-field stuff? Jonathan Jones, I'm trying to remember, was he undrafted? I think he might have been undrafted entirely. So yeah, they're not, a lot of these guys not picked in like the first round. Dietrich Wise, fourth round pick. Christian Barmore was a second round pick, and he's been fantastic for them. Josh Uche is a second round pick. They're not picked necessarily in the first round. There's not a ton of first round picks on the defense. I think out of the starters, the only first round pick might be Devin McCourty, and that was 12, 13 years ago. So, Juwan Bentley played a pretty big role for them. He's a linebacker. He's a fifth round pick. So, yeah, the strategy, if you see a trade down in the first round, I don't think it really implicates the way that they go about picking, defenders in the draft, because it's about tools that they can use. They are not all that concerned if a player is good at something that they're not that interested in using, right? Like if they get a player that's good at everything, they'll find a way to use all of those various talents, right? But they don't have to get a guy that's good at all the things. And so they might more likely spend a first round pick on somebody that might have to be good at everything, like an offensive lineman, right? They've got like 2 to 3 first round picks on the offensive line. They've got a first round quarterback, obviously. They might spend that first or second round pick on somebody that they want to have a more complete skill set for, whereas that defense might just be, hey, you're only good at one thing, so you fall into the fourth round, but that's the one thing we want, that's kind of what a Caleb Evans is, by the way. So we might not see, even if the defense is the highest priority, that coming up.
It was pointed out today on Twitter that the second oldest quarterback in the league right now is Kirk Cousins. First is Aaron Rodgers, but second is Kirk Cousins. Is this the time that the Vikings pick up a quarterback?
I'm really curious about this because you would think that somebody that comes from kind of this, I hate saying it because it's like a trope at this point, analytics background would be curious about that because of the extraordinary value proposition of a quarterback in the first round, especially if they, work out, right? I know that Adofo-Mensah, he's obviously spent time with the Browns, or they didn't really do that. They picked quarterbacks when they needed them, not when they already had one.
But
right?
They always seem to need one.
Yeah, in fairness, yeah.
I'm just remembering the back of the jersey.
Right. Well, I'm just, while Adofo-Mensah was there, that jersey list did not get too long, right? It was mostly Baker. But while Baker was the presumed starter, they did not go out of their way to grab a quarterback. It was only when Baker was no longer going to be the starter that they were like, yeah, we're going to spend a first round pick on a quarterback. That means trading this time, right? But it doesn't mean, but we're picking a quarterback when we need one, which I don't know. This is an NFLism. I forgot who said it. Maybe it was Ron Wolf. I don't know. But the worst time to get a quarterback is when you need one, right? Like that's the NFLism. And that's kind of true. But Adofo-Mensah also spent time in San Francisco, and they've been doing that a lot. And it's worked out. So it's possible. I think that is something that the Vikings should consider, even if they extend Kirk Cousins 3 years, right? If it's this year, next year, and the year after, they should consider a quarterback, because if you're done with Cousins, you can trade him, right? Like the Jimmy Garoppolo situation is kind of unusual because the 49ers were asking for the world and they didn't get it. And so they kept him, and, thank God, right? Because I don't know that Brock Purdy would have been ready that early, right? So I would say so. I mean, I've said this like 8 or 9 times now, so I'm sure it's tired for people who have listened to a couple of my podcast or radio appearances, but take a look at the conference championship participants and the Super Bowl participants. They all took quarterbacks when they had a franchise guy, right? Patrick Mahomes taken when Alex Smith had already taken them to the Super Bowl and had already made a Pro Bowl, right? Jalen Hurts taken when MVP candidate Carson Wentz was on the roster, right? Joe Burrow's like the only one, right? So they were just like, yeah, we need a quarterback. We got the number 1 pick, Joe Burrow. Come on down. So yeah, that's I think is an important lesson, right? That like you can develop a guy and that's fine, and you don't have to start him right away. And if he doesn't turn out, he doesn't turn out. But like the Packers weren't wrong to pick Jordan Love in theory, right? If Jordan Love is bad, obviously they were wrong, and I didn't love him as a prospect. So, but like
they were probably wrong to trade up for him. But
right. The Packers' approach here might have been wrong in a number of ways, i.e., the player that they picked, the process by which they grabbed that player, and the fact that they just did not tell their Hall of Fame quarterback that this was in the pipeline.
The idea was solid. The execution, boy.
Right. But like Aaron Rodgers was that they picked him when Favre was still had a couple of years left. Now they anticipated he'd retire earlier than he did, but they drafted him in 2005, right? Like Favre wasn't out of there until like 2008. So there were like a couple of years there, right? So I wouldn't think that that's a bad idea, nor would it demonstrate a lack of confidence in Cousins necessarily. It's just good to have these guys. The Patriots did it a ton, right? Well, we got Tom Brady. Screw it. We're drafting Jimmy Garoppolo. Okay, we'll trade him. We got Tom Brady. Screw it. We're drafting Jacoby Brissett. All right, we'll trade him, right? Like they did it a ton and it worked out for the most part. Like, Tom Brady went down. We got Matt Castle. Yeah, we drafted him in the 7th round and he didn't play a snap of college football. But, we got Matt Castle and it worked out, right? I mean, they didn't make the playoffs, but they went 11-5. Like that's, I'm going to count it, right?
Still pretty remarkable considering.
Yeah. So I think that should be on the cards, right? And now that I think there's a little bit more steam for Anthony Richardson, I would still say there's not a ton, but there's still a little bit more steam for Anthony Richardson. He might be out of the capacity for the Vikings to trade up and get him. But if he's not, I would consider it. I mean, from a stylistic perspective, some people are comparing him to Patrick Mahomes. And from what I've seen, stylistically, that kind of makes sense. Now, to temper that is not too dissimilar from the style of Kyler Murray, right? So it is not as if the stylistic comp guarantees, that kind of thing, right? But, that to me describes a quarterback that you might be able to develop and potentially unlock some upside for. I haven't done a deep dive on Anthony Richardson or Will Levis. So this is more just me kind of gleaning it from reading like 8 million scouting reports as I'm compiling these consensus boards. But that kind of athleticism, that kind of arm strength for both of them, the willingness and ability to innovate and improvise, those are all assets that they just have, and you kind of want to work on everything else. My understanding is that it was a fairly simplified offense for Richardson at Florida, that he didn't have a ton of help around him, and that he just kind of had to make plays. But when things were working, when the structure was available for him to operate in, he operated in that structure and made relatively quick decisions. Again, a fairly simple offense. Again, my understanding. But if you isolate just the in-structure plays and the moments where the offensive line holds up and the receivers are running their routes and there's somebody open in the progression, he rifles it in there. And when it's not, he plays hero ball, right? Which can be bad. We saw some Ben DiNucci hero ball, but it can be good. We saw the Super Bowl. So, I would think that especially these high upside guys like Will Levis or Anthony Richardson, if they're available to the Vikings, that would be worth it. Probably not, in which case you're flirting with the idea of having maybe the 5th quarterback in the draft in the 1st round, which, by the way, let's be careful here too. We were talking about that last year, and there was one quarterback drafted in the 1st round. That was Kenny Pickett. Kind of unremarkable. And all these guys that we're talking about as potential, maybe no one had committed to them as necessarily 1st rounders. So I'm not going to knock everybody, but there were people that were talking, including me. I put them in my mock drafts. I'm not going to isolate myself from it. They were talking about potentially 5 quarterbacks in the 1st round, setting an NFL record or tying an NFL record for the most quarterbacks selected in the 1st round, right? So I'm not saying that all 4 of these guys are going to get selected. Maybe we see the Malik Willis, Sam Howell treatment where they dropped the 3rd and 5th round. Desmond Ridder, I think, 3rd rounder, Sam Howell, a 5th rounder. all these guys that we're talking about as potential first rounders, top of the second rounders, ended up going third through fifth, right? So that's possible. But if those 4 quarterbacks are quarterbacks that we expect to all go in the first round, and we know the top 2 almost certainly are, right? No promises, but almost certainly are, then maybe we think about Hendon Hooker, who has been generally regarded as the 5th quarterback. I've seen some other quarterbacks kind of get moved up the chart, as it were. Let me see what my most recent consensus big board says from January. Okay. Google wanted me to Google that instead of going to my history. That's very good, Google. Thank you. So outside of if it loads, outside of Hendon Hooker as the 5th quarterback, Tanner McKee. Yeah, okay, so I did get that name right. Tanner McKee from Stanford is the other one. I don't see a ton of first round steam for him. I do see some occasional first round steam for Hooker. But after that, if you don't get one of these guys in the first or second round, it seems like at this point, it seems like a fairly limited class. Now, Emory Hunt did put the JMU quarterback as his 4th quarterback. So it is, anything's possible. Through them, all things are possible. But, you've got Jaron Hall at BYU. People aren't overjoyed by him, but he did have a standard performance in the All-Star circuit. So there is that. But, yeah, I think that it makes a ton of sense to take a look at some of these quarterbacks, especially if one of these presumed first-rounders comes within striking range.
Here's a fun question for you. Who gets the longer extension, Cousins or Daniel Jones?
Oh, man. I mean, Daniel Jones is younger, right? Just Cousins is a better quarterback. God, that feels weird. Not because I'm complimenting Cousins, but just because, like, the whole narrative about Cousins this year and Daniel Jones this year have been running in opposite directions. Cousins performed well in really high leverage situations, but played poorly for most of his snaps this year. Daniel Jones improved substantially. So Cousins, quote unquote, got worse, right? For some quality of having gotten worse. And Daniel Jones got substantially better. But like Cousins is just a better quarterback, right? That one's tough. Daniel Jones is probably going to get franchise tagged, and then they're going to negotiate while he's on the franchise tag, and that gives him some level of leverage. Cousins obviously has a guaranteed contract for this year, so it's like a franchise tag, but it's not as much money. I would say that Jones gets a longer extension, but Cousins will maintain his record of 100% guarantees.
That's almost Hall of Fame worthy right there. Like, yeah, the ability to just get guaranteed money.
Which is why his extensions are so short, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Because, but yes.
Like, you can't write, the Hall of Fame really should be, you can't write the history of the league without this person's name, or like without this person's contributions. You could say that about the money that Kirk Cousins has made over his career, whether it was the repeated franchise tags in Washington or the guaranteed money in Minnesota. The dude got paid.
Yeah, he got paid.
Like that is 100% for certain. And Ndamukong Suh as well, just because of the amount of money he got paid. But like,
you've got like Cousins, Suh, Darrelle Revis, and then on the other end of it, you've got like your Flynn.
Yes, I was about to say Matt Flynn is the king of this. Right. Matt Flynn has a wing of this Hall of Fame just for him, and all the jerseys for all the teams that he didn't play for.
Oh yeah,
but he still got a check.
Like even Clipboard Jesus and Chase Daniel, Clipboard Jesus, Charlie Whitehurst, by the way. I mean, they made a fair amount of money not throwing the ball. So, who was it? Was it Luke McNown, right? It was Cade McNown, Luke McCown. I think it was Luke McCown who did like a Verizon commercial about never getting to play, and then like Drew Brees got hurt.
Yeah,
and he played like the next game.
By the way, did you see Josh McCown is the QB coach for the Panthers now?
Oh yeah, well that's okay.
One more
that's
team.
Great, but also that is one more team. But also like kind of funny because he played he wasn't quite Ryan Fitzpatrick or anything like that, but he played a really intuitive brand of football. So It's not quite like having Fitzpatrick or Favre coaching your quarterbacks, but it's like, what exactly are you teaching them? Like Cousins, I can see being a really great quarterback coach, right? You know, he knows what the textbook is. He knows what the mechanics are. He knows how to see the field. He knows, like, you know, he knows it because he has had essentially backup quality talent that he has turned through sheer force of will and studying into franchise level talent. Like that's the coach you want. Right? McCown, I'm sure. I mean, good for him, dude. And if Frank Reich sees a good quarterback coach in him, he's more likely to be right than wrong. But still, that's interesting.
I will say that I was really sad that our prediction last episode did not end up coming true about the Colts hiring Jeff Saturday at halftime of the Super Bowl. Like the moment that like all the rumors broke about hiring the offensive coordinator for the Eagles, like the moment those rumors broke, I felt so sad because Jeff Saturday being hired at halftime of the Super Bowl would just be such amazing optics. Or better, you hire him the day before and you have his presser during the Super Bowl. How do you do anything greater in the history of we're just going to sneak this in than that? Could have been one of the finest moments in NFL history.
Yeah, honestly. It would have been like a reverse Vontae Davis.
Yes, absolutely. Although probably more Wild Wings than that. I still contend that would have been just an amazing moment. Let's go into some mailbag stuff here. There's a fair amount of off topic. It is the off season, but the beginning of it and the middle of it definitely are on. Let's go to Connor, who asks, would you trade for Anthony Richardson if he drops around 10?
Around 10? The trade up from 23-ish, right? 23-ish. From 23 to 10 is rough.
That's pretty steep.
Yeah, especially if it is for a quarterback. You take a look at, so I think Rich Hill has now done two charts, one for quarterback trades, one for non-quarterback trades. But I don't know about 10. 14 we're talking.
The next question is going to be from Burrito Bill, who asks, which wide receiver will the Bears draft at 24 when the Vikings trade down? I mean, you are having somebody who's not a quarterback or not somebody who likes to pass the ball.
It would complete the cycle, though, right? For all of the NFC. Man, if it's like a Josh Downs type, like a dude that can, like, kind of short, not going to be a premier receiver, but like if the Bears are just full of these after catch mavens that are all going to take advantage of short passes, and then Justin Fields uncorks a deep one because Josh Downs got behind the defense, like that's going to be really annoying. But like
the Chicago Yak Kings at that point,
right? Because you like Tariq Cohen and Darnell Mooney, and I think Tariq Cohen's on the roster, and Josh Downs, and now you're not asking Justin Fields to make too many difficult throws. It's kind of reminiscent of some of the easier games at Ohio State, and then somebody just gets behind the defense and he's got a deep ball and now he's running the ball, and I mean that would be annoying. So I'm going to go with Josh Downs. Where would they trade down to? Because what's the Bears' next pick? That might be tough. Because I don't think they've got a second.
By the way, Cohen is now a free agent according to Wikipedia.
Oh, okay. You'd have to trade down to 54 because the Bears gave up their 33rd overall pick to Pittsburgh. So, but they got a second round pick from Baltimore. So that would be quite the. I imagine like Chicago would trade down from one, probably get a second round pick, and that's the one you're trading for.
Something like that, yeah. All right, next question, not next episode. Is going to be from All20Q, who asks, what would it take for Justin Fields trade speculators to just shut up?
What did Emory Hunt say? This is one of the stupidest things I'd ever heard. I'm not there, but I think that I saw people get annoyed about what I had said about how Justin Fields was actually turning in some pretty good football performances. the second half of the season. And I just like, I don't see the problem with saying that. I'm not saying he played like the best football in the world. He was not like a top 8 quarterback in the second half of the season. But I mean, just a quick proxy, just a quick check on like my intuition here. I'm just going to take a quick look at the PFF grades for like weeks, let's say 10 through 17 for quarterbacks. And see, we got minimum dropbacks. Let's get 20% of 355 offense. And yeah, he was 22nd, right? So that's a pretty substantial improvement over what we saw in the first half of the season, except the 49ers game, obviously, in the rain, which I'm not going to count. But if we take a look at the first half of the season, and I think his EPA was pretty high because those runs were really valuable, so I think his EPA is even higher. First half of the season, actually he was 17th. I'm an idiot. But I'm going to still maintain it. I'm going to say that Justin Fields in the second half of the season played some pretty interesting, exciting football, especially from a passing perspective, where now I'm taking a look at the passing numbers. Actually, he was much better passer in the second half of the season. It's the fumbles that made those two things look even. And I think that when you see these exciting flashes where he's actually able to string together some like really interesting big throws, I mean, he killed the Packers, right? And he's got like not a great receiver group around him. He's reducing his pressure to sack rate. His designed runs are working because they're building the offense a little bit more around him. I think it would be a catastrophic error to think that there is nothing there to work with and that you just kind of want to move on. And I don't mean this from like a loss aversion. Oh, it would suck to see this guy play for another team and him do well. I mean this literally from the Bears' perspective, right? That a quarterback in a rookie contract is one of the most valuable and most difficult things to find in football because you don't ever want to lose a quarterback. So as soon as you find one, you extend them. And now they're no longer on a rookie contract. I think that we're not going to see the trade speculation stop until the draft, but I think it's going to die down because I think the talking point is going to hit a crescendo maybe in the next couple of days. Honestly, I don't think it's hit a peak yet. It's going to hit a crescendo. Then it's going to die down because I don't think anyone sees anything in it. There's a lot he has to work on. He invites a ton of pressure. He holds onto the ball a ton, even on non-scrambling plays. He makes the right decision, but he doesn't make it fast enough. So there's a lot there that needs to happen, but like ultimately, I think you saw some pretty exciting stuff from him. And I think that it is worth continuing to attempt to develop him. I think it is a bad idea for teams to follow the Josh Allen model, hoping it'll work out, because typically players that perform as badly as Josh Allen did in year one, and then also in year two, where he made a huge improvement in year two, but he still was one of the worst quarterbacks in football, which tells you how bad year one was. Make an enormous improvement in year three. That doesn't really happen. So I'm not going to say that that's a good example, but it's also not what happened with Justin Fields. He didn't play that many games year one, and he wasn't that good in the few games that he played. Year two, we saw an arc, I think, of development where I thought that he played well down the stretch, that it is worth holding on to him because of the development that you saw, because he didn't play his 17th game until halfway through this season. So it'd be kind of ridiculous to just assume that you've got 2 bad years out of him, because you didn't. You had basically one bad season, his rookie year, the first 17 games, I'm going to say, and then you saw a pretty big leap forward in improvement. So you might as well hold on to him. That's not to say they shouldn't draft a quarterback, maybe not at 1-1, but you know, in the second round, if they trade down and they get a second round pick, like we just talked about, if they see like a Tanner McKee there, yeah, that's smart, right? And then that's somebody that you can turn to if Justin Fields doesn't turn out, or at the trade deadline, you know, it's you feel like you've got a lot in Tanner McKee. Justin Fields isn't working out. He wants to go somewhere else. Another team knows how to use him. Maybe like the Ravens have another Lamar Jackson injury. Then you can trade him, right? But I don't think that they should trade him, but I don't think that the trade speculation is going to stop for at least a week.
Well, speaking of the debates, let's go to Draw Play Dave, who asks, will I ever be free of this Daniel Jones debate hell?
Nope.
No, absolutely not. You want to you got your wish. You got to see a win in a playoff game for your team. now you get to reap what you have sown. Like, this is it. They wanted confirmation that Daniel Jones was this great player. You got to see the win.
Yeah, man. He is elite at the one quarterback stat that matters: wins.
Did a part of you die when you finished that sentence? I'm just curious. I've heard the argument against QB wins so many times. I have to assume that a little part of Arif just died here. I Rebuilds asks, could you please explain the ins and outs of the Patrick Peterson and Tomlinson void years, and if that affects our ability to sign free agents in a meaningful way?
So what the void years do is that they extend the impact of the signing bonus of the salary cap, right? Because the signing bonus's impact on the salary cap is spread out over the course of the lifetime of the contract or the first 5 years of the new contract, whichever makes the most sense, right? Like if the lifetime of the contract is longer than 5 years, then it's the first 5 years. If it's shorter than 5 years, it's the lifetime of the contract, right? So whichever comes first, I guess. The void years add years onto the contract so that the signing bonus per year is much smaller. The thing is, a void year automatically cuts a player, right? Which means that you then incur all of the impact of cutting that player the year that you cut him. So when we talk about cutting a player on the roster, right? Like people are talking about, let me pull up the Vikings over the cap right now. So we take a look at, Adam Thielen's a good example. Harrison Smith is a good example. But we take a look at Danielle Hunter, right? No one wants to cut him, but he's a really good example because of the structure of his contract. If the Vikings were to cut Danielle Hunter right now, his cap number right now is $13 million, right? If they cut him right now, his cap number, no longer being on the roster, is $18.9 million. So he costs more to cut than to keep. The reason is, first of all, his salary is, I guess his salary is not guaranteed this year, but he's got a prorated bonus. So because that prorated signing bonus, the signing bonus that had been spread out over the course of his extension, now all comes home and hits you in the year that you cut that player. So in a void year, it all comes into the year that you voided the player. So right now, the Vikings carry a cap hit for both Patrick Peterson and Dalvin Tomlinson because they automatically cut both of them as a result of the void year. So the cap number for Patrick Peterson right now, no longer on the roster, is $750,000. The cap hit for Dalvin Tomlinson right now, no longer on the roster, is $7.5 million. That's pretty high, but he had a pretty good signing bonus. So all of that, the last 3 years of his signing bonus, the 5-year thing, gets smooshed into the 2023 cap. So that's what happens. That means the Vikings have less cap space because they have to account for the dead cap of these players. In addition to any signing bonus, the dead cap also includes anything else that's guaranteed. So the signing bonus is guaranteed. So are base salaries. But obviously in a void year, you've not guaranteed the salaries of those voided years unless you're doing something really stupid. Can't rule that out. So now the Vikings have, because of these voided contracts, $8.25 million in cap space just from those two contracts that they don't have available to them as a result of the signing bonus accelerating into the 2023 season. That impacts their projected 2023 cap space. That's one of obviously many reasons the Vikings have effectively negative $27.5 million in cap space. I say effectively because two things need to be taken into account that are not currently taken into account in their cap space. One, the Vikings need to get up to 51 players under contract. For the Vikings specifically, that is taken into account. They have 53 players under contract, including, reserve contracts and stuff like that. But two, the allotted money available to them in the NFL draft based on the current draft selections. And so right now the Vikings are at 25 essentially million in cap space, but they have to account for 27.5 because of the draft picks. So that impacts their ability to sign free agents. Now the Vikings obviously are not done with the way that they're going to manipulate the cap. If they extend Kirk Cousins, for example, they can get his current $36 million cap hit down, even if his average per year goes up, because they can convert some amount of base salary into signing bonus. And if they, like, for example, if they converted $9 million of his current $10 million of base salary into signing bonus, that would mean to be 9 million divided by 5 on top of his current prorated bonus, which is 6.25. So they can bring down only a little bit, but they can bring down his cap hit by that signing bonus. So they can, it's maybe 1 plus 8, right? So his cap hit can go all the way from 36 million. He's also got a roster bonus, so you gotta change that too. But all the way from 36 million to 29 million if you keep his current roster bonus, by getting rid of 4/5 of the non-minimum salary that's guaranteed. So there's a bunch of things they can do. They can trade Adam Thielen, which would clear up about $13 million. They could rework Brian O'Neill's contract, which could clear up about $7 million. They could do all those things. But right now the Vikings have negative cap space, negative 27.7 or something like that, 27.4. And about 8 million of it is because of the nature of these void years on these deals, which is also why they were able to sign somebody like Za'Darius Smith or somebody like Dalvin Tomlinson to the roster in the first place, because this is not the first year the Vikings have entered March with negative cap space. In fact, they had negative cap space at this point last year when they signed a hefty parcel of free agents. And then they had pretty limited cap space also the year before. Heading into March, they were able to get Dalvin Tomlinson. So it does impact things, and that is a non-manipulable contract at this point, because the void is now triggered, right? And so you're just going to take that. You have to manipulate the contracts you currently have. But yeah, it does impact the FAs, but I'm not worried about it.
Well, let's go to the next question from Ruben Frost, who asks, when teams or outlets perceive certain bands of talent in a draft, example, the Vikings believed late first, early second was a good spot last year, is this something they're generally accurate on, or is it as hard to predict as the rest of the draft process?
Based off of my research, NFL teams do a decent job of predicting, and I should say, based off of my research, which was made significantly better by Timo Risk's research over at PFF, when he studied cliffs of talent. He asked me for my data and then did science to it or something. I don't know. And came up with a number of really useful conclusions. One of them is that they're really good at identifying bands or cliffs of talent or tiers of talent for individual positions. The NFL at large is, anyway. I shouldn't say teams. And the NFL at large is, but they're not great at figuring out overall the draft. So if a team is really only focused at wide receiver and they only need a wide receiver, they only need 8, or I shouldn't say 8. They only need 4 positions near the top of the draft, and they can kind of hone in on their evaluation. They're pretty good at separating out of the tiers. Now, ordering within tiers, they're not great at. But if the NFL largely agrees that these 4 receivers are about similarly talented, they're right, usually. Obviously, you get your 5th round receiver like Stephon Diggs or Antonio Brown that turns out to be actually one of the best receivers in the league or something. But for the most part, they do a pretty good job of tiering those receivers. They just don't do a very good job of ordering those receivers within those tiers. So the first receiver selected within a particular tier is not necessarily the best of those receivers, right? It's pretty random within them. But they're not great overall at predicting when the cliffs of overall draft talent is. So if you see a lot of trades into an area, which also means trades out of an area, so there's a bit of a push and pull, that is not an indication that area of the draft is necessarily rich in talent. It's just where the runs in talent are. Let's say, because there's probably going to be a run at cornerback in the draft. That's probably going to be pretty accurately determined. So based off of what we know, no, but without access to the way teams themselves order boards and only access to the NFL, and knowing that the NFL doesn't refuse to pick. If a team refuses to pick, famously, right, another team will just pick at that spot and now it's their pick, right? Because the NFL is essentially required to have a pick at every position, it's kind of hard to make a determination about overall draft talent, but based off of trade activity and stuff like that, we can kind of determine where teams overall have a sense, but it's tough. Unless we get teams team boards, which we only ever get the Cowboys because Jerry Jones is very weird about that. Just like shows it off now. I don't know, but
the occasional accidental thing happening. Yeah.
Yeah. And we've had access to Jerry Jones's board like at least 4 times now. Just, like in the background of a video or something. Right. Yeah. We won't really be able to tell. Like one year I was able to get a look at the Vikings draft board. I won't say which year. And it was pretty close to the NFL's overall picks that year, which I guess that's a credit to Spielman. But the quarterbacks were ordered way wrong, it turns out. So I'll say that in that draft, the Vikings got lucky. So, yeah, it's tough without access to the teams to get a good sense of teams knowing where bands of talent are. But at positions, the NFL is pretty good at tiering them out.
Let's go to our next question, which is a very important one. Armenson Bolsharif asks, has Arif hired someone, perhaps a local kid, given his pro-child labor stance, to shovel his driveway to ensure that no breaking news is missed due to him taking a nap after shoveling during this winter storm?
I did have to take a nap after shoveling a ton of snow once, and there was breaking news.
It was the Case Cookus news.
Yeah, it was pretty big. But I will say, this is, I should just not post in our Discord. This is what I'm learning. I'm learning not to post.
Which is funny because you've been more active recently than you ever have been.
I have regretted it. One of the really great benefits to our Patreon is that you get direct access to James and me, and we'll chat in an exclusive Discord that I am now learning that I don't want to participate in. Anyway, I posted that. Okay, so a while back we had a conversation about Insomnia cookies and Crumble cookies, and I would say that overall the outcome of that conversation is that Crumble cookies was more of a bougie cookie. Was actually the bougie cookie of the two. They were more expensive cookies, and they had more high prominent labor violations in their practices, according to the news. This is not to say Insomnia cookies did not also hit the news with some labor violations, but they seem to be fairly localized to particular franchises as opposed to apparently across the alleged. I'm going to say allegedly. And
allegedly, yeah,
right.
Best to use allegedly.
Allegedly and apparently across the company with Crumble cookies, to the best of my recollection. Where they would employ people under the age of 16 to probably not drive, I'm assuming, probably to cook. But I don't know, maybe clean the
break some eggs. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Dishwasher type stuff, which dishwashers in most restaurants will like do food prep. So, that had been established. And then at the Super Bowl, my editor was really adamant that we get Crumble cookies. So I just cooked a phenomenal ribeye with asparagus and baked potatoes. We ate it. We were both having the time of our lives. And he's like, man.
Eating like kings.
Oh, God. That's so good. That way too on the nose. And
I am enjoying this so much.
And he was like, I could really go for something sweet. I was like, okay, cool. Let me pull up DoorDash. What do they have nearby? And I was just naming names. I don't know if any of these are real recipes. Like Aunt Angela's Cake Emporium or whatever. I'm just going through Crumble cookies. And he's like, have you had Crumble cookies, Arif? And I was like, no, and I'm kind of hesitant to. And he's like, no, absolutely not. We're getting Crumble cookies.
The child labor makes it better.
And I was like, okay, but like the whole thing about Crumble cookies, and he's like, is that they're delicious? And I was like, okay, I can't speak to that. I've never had Crumble cookies. The whole thing is that, they've been in the news for like labor violations and stuff like that. And he's like, what, you think Auntie Emporium's cake shop? What, I already screwed up the name I just made up. Auntie May's Cake Emporium. You think that they have ethical labor practices, or even it's just like, I was like, well, I don't know for a fact that they do, and that's like an improvement, right? and he's like, well, we're getting crumble cookies. And I was like, ugh. And he's like, well, I'll just order them. And he ordered them on his own phone, on his own DoorDash. And God, they were delicious.
Yep.
They were so good. They were some of the best cookies I've ever had, dude. They were so good. I'm so upset. But I just want to say I was not the one who paid for them. So I said to the Discord, hey, I didn't pay for them. And they were like, oh, so you stole all their labor? And I was like, no, that's not what I mean by that. Someone else, not me, paid for them. Someone else, not me, chose them. Someone else, not me, made the decision. I did put up an admittedly fairly weak resistance, but a resistance.
Boy.
And I gotta say, there have been no new allegations about violations of labor practices at Crumble Cookies since that previous discussion. So, for all we know, that issue has been resolved. If you believe...
Is that what you're telling yourself to get yourself to sleep at night?
Look, okay, we can say that people carry moral stains, right? We can say, hey, you committed this immoral act in the past. I think that makes you an immoral person. That's a debate for ethicists and philosophers or whatever, right? You could say, hey, you committed this immoral act in the past. That makes you, unless you make amends or something, right? But a company is not a person, as much as the Supreme Court would like you to believe, right? And if they engage in a bad practice before, that does not mean, especially if they've been exposed, that they're engaging in a bad practice now. Now, I have some systemic concerns about companies generally, right? That's just true of companies. But if we're concerned about a specific violation that a company makes, and they make it once, Auntie May is probably committing a labor violation that we just don't know about. That's all that's happening here. But also, I did not contribute to any of it because I didn't pay for it. I didn't make the decision. I wasn't part of this. And at that point, the cookie is already there.
I don't know what to tell you. I didn't pay for the free weekend of the new Harry Potter game, but I did. It was just installed on my computer, and I played anyway. And I don't need to hear anyone tell me about how this is hurting any sort of cause because I didn't pay for it. It was there. I was just following what the group was doing. I was just following what everybody else was doing. I was just following orders.
Okay, first of all, I didn't say either of those two things. It's not even close to those two things. But also, look, man, if you go to the high seas and acquire a Harry Potter game, right? and you don't like tell people to buy it, I don't care. Man, you play it at home private. Who cares? I hear it's a bad game, so good luck with that. But if you're not materially supporting a thing, who cares? I am ethically consistent on this one.
And if you're known for anything, it's being ethically consistent. Let's be perfectly clear here.
Right. Okay. The cookies were delicious. I just wanted that to be clear too.
I want that to be the episode title. The cookies were delicious. This is one of the best dumb things on the show in years. Rasta asks, when's Rasta going to be allowed to be a guest star on the show? I think early April. We can figure something in there.
I will say, for all of the meme accounts that annoy me, Rasta has moved up one ranking because he didn't do the feet post. So
no,
that's that relatively speaking, that moves you up a little bit.
There's been a couple of choice ones lately based on dumb Vikings Twitter drama. So
yeah.
That for sure. Luke Braun's dad is asking, which XFL team do I root for? The one with Willie Beavers or something else?
Okay, the fact that Willie Beavers is on an XFL team is extremely funny to me.
the ghost of Willie Beavers.
Right. He's currently on the Arlington Renegades, one of probably the two best teams in the XFL. The other one being another Texas team the Houston Roughnecks, which if you confuse the Renegades and the Roughnecks, fair enough. They're both from Texas. Both start with the letter R. I get it. But I would say probably not the Houston Roughnecks because Luke Braun wants to cheer for them, and that seems kind of dicey to me. I like, what is it, the Brahmas? Okay, first of all, interest of full disclosure, I didn't watch any XFL football this last weekend, right? Did I already say that on the show?
No, we were talking about it before. It turns out that I watched more of it than you did, which was impressive because I only watched the end of the Seattle game where DiNucci caused the game to end.
Right. So I like I don't know anything about these teams. And DiNucci, I saw one highlight. He played beautifully. Don't tell me any more than that.
Sadly, he fumbled to lose the game for them.
That was explicitly not the thing I asked.
Yeah, well, the cookies were delicious, Arif. I don't know what to tell you.
Okay, there's like this Kentucky butter cookie. Anyway, melted butter on top, and it arrived melted. It hadn't solidified yet. That's incredible. So the San Antonio Brahmas are named after a hybrid species of cattle crossbred with a zebu named the American Brahmin, but that one is named after Hindu deity, one of the essentially the triumvirate of Hindu gods. I'm already massacring this extraordinarily complex mythology.
I like how I could cut it like even easier too. It's from the Brahma bull, which is also the tattoo that The Rock had on his arm until he like updated it.
But I was getting there.
Were you? Because yes! I think you were still thinking about that butter cookie.
No, look, okay. I want to be clear. I'm reading this off of the San Antonio Brahmas Wikipedia page, and it includes that information. Okay, so I was getting there.
Were you? Okay, well.
But I will say I did know this bit about the Hindu theology. Not enough to explain it well. If you want to read the Bhagavad Gita, go ahead. But there is a triumvirate of Hindu deities, one of whom is responsible for destruction, one of whom is responsible for creation, and one of whom is responsible for a third secret thing. That was maybe a little bit disrespectful. But the Brahma is responsible for creation, bringing all of creation into existence. And there's a reason that cows are sacred in most Hindu theologies, which is the Brahman, the relationship that this god has to creation. I think that's really cool. Obviously, the association with The Rock is also cool with the tattoo. Their head coach is Hines Ward. That's just fun. That's a fun piece of knowledge. I don't know. That to me is who makes sense to cheer for. Now, of course, I'm probably going to find out something awful about somebody on this team. But I'm just going to have to live with that. By the way, the linebackers coach is Joey Porter. I think that's cool too. Kalen Ballage is one of the running backs. That's kind of fun. I don't know if I love the quarterback group here, but I don't know if there's any quarterback group I love aside from the Battlehawks, like AJ McCarron, right?
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, there's some names here like I love these who's who type things. Cameron Kelly has been ripping up the AAF and I believe the USFL. He played on the Steelers pretty briefly, but he's kind of fun. Steven Denmark is like the super athlete. I think he's like 6'2", something like that, from Valdosta State. See, yeah, 6'2", 217. Wow, great memory. But yeah, a bunch of who's who guys on here. Damian Mama, one of their centers. Brad Wing, the punter with off-field concerns that somehow didn't get drafted. Wow, crazy. The off-field concerns, as far as I can tell, are just like he gets drunk a lot, which is not what you want in a punter. But man, he could kick the heck out of the ball at LSU. Yeah, I don't know. Go with the Brahmas.
Next question is from Ingram's Left Foot, who asks, Monday morning GM stuff. Is there any slam dunk moves the Vikings should just get done to start clearing cap space to start the year? And if you say ham, be prepared for the waterworks. It's like
Ham clears up like $750,000 of cap space. That is nowhere near a slam dunk anything. First of all, it's not as if he's useless in the offense. Now, they didn't use him as much as I had anticipated when I wrote the piece about him. I will say that. But he has a function within the offense that I think can expand given his skill set. I don't think that he is not worth $750,000. Certainly, I think that you'll get more value out of that than the amount of value you get out of cutting him. So I'm not even going to put him on the list, even though I understand why some people would. I think the priority move should be to move Adam Thielen. It doesn't clear up as much space as some other moves, but it's basically up there in terms of the most you can clear up. He seems pretty resigned to not being here anymore. He's certainly not worth essentially a $20 million hit. It's 19.97, so essentially a $20 million hit. It doesn't seem like he wants to renegotiate the contract. I don't know that you'll get a ton for him because of his age and the fact that this last year of production was not phenomenal or anything like that. But I think you'll be able to get something. The Vikings do need a couple more picks. They only have like 5 picks in this draft. It's really concerning. I shouldn't say concerning. It's just kind of upsetting if you're doing a mock draft machine, but they'll get more by the time the draft runs around. But it'd be nice to get that ammo, right? So I think that's like the move you have to make, and I think that there's going to be a market for him. So that to me makes sense. I think figuring the Dalvin Cook thing is really, I'm not going to say complicated. It's just thorny because it seems very clear to me that my understanding is that Dalvin Cook is not going to accept a pay cut, and it is pretty tough from a team perspective anyway to cut him. Now, if you cut him, he'd be $8.2 million. You'd be freeing up, I think, about like $6 million, something like that. So, if you cut him, you're not saving a ton of money, but are you getting $6 million of value out of him? I don't know. Probably not, based off of all of our running back research, based off of his last year of production. But it seems like the Vikings very much value what he does. And that's why I think it's complicated and thorny, because right now his cap number is $14.1 million. Not worth it. Certainly not worth that, right? If I'm hemming and hawing over if he brings $6 million, no chance he actually brings in $14 million of value, right? But like the Vikings, just generally speaking, do really like having a Dalvin Cook on the roster. So it would be pretty tough to make a move. So I don't know if there's a slam dunk move here, right? The trade market for Dalvin Cook is going to be atrocious. Not just because he's a running back with an expensive contract, because there are teams that still value running backs. Christian McCaffrey was just traded for a first, right? And the team that takes him on, I think, is only going to have to pay for like $8 million. So it's not going to be that big of a contract for them. But you take a look at the running backs in like free agency. If I could take a look at the tracker for running backs real quick. The running back market is pretty stacked, right? Josh Jacobs, who just made like second team All-Pro, I think, is hitting free agency. Saquon Barkley, he's probably not going to end up hitting free agency, but he's hitting free agency, right? The best backup running back in football, Kareem Hunt, is hitting free agency. I guess Tony Pollard, right? But he's hitting free agency, right? Raheem Mostert is hitting free agency. Like this is a Jamal Williams is hitting free agency, and he's not like a world beater or anything like that. But if you're a team deciding between trading away an asset like a 4th round pick to take on an $8 million cap hit for Dalvin Cook, or signing Jamal Williams for like $4 million and keeping that 4th round pick and having another $4 million in cap, like I feel like Jamal Williams is a better option for you most of the time. Donta Foreman, right? Like Samaje Perine, Ronald Jones, like there are some running backs hitting free agency that it's going to be tough. This is an okay running back draft class. Obviously got Bijan Robinson at the top, and then a couple of others in the 2nd and 3rd round. I don't know if Bijan Robinson is going to be a first rounder, but the consensus seems to be that he will be. But like there's a reasonable draft class too. So the market for Dalvin Cook is more limited than it typically would be in this kind of situation, outside of the fact that running backs typically are not worth much. Again, Christian McCaffrey, I think Raheem Mostert was actually also traded. So there's stuff there to tell us that teams are willing to pay for a running back. But like, San Francisco was on a run and had some desperation to win some games right now. And so that's like why they did a midseason trade as opposed to an off-season trade where you have a number of options available to you, because San Francisco could not draft Bijan Robinson in the middle of the season without at least annoying the University of Texas, right? So that it would be tough. But yeah, I don't know that there's a lot you could do. So I'm not going to call it a slam dunk move. To me, the most obvious move is to find a trade partner for Adam Thielen, because I think that there is going to be a market for him.
Can we talk about the Dalvin Cook thing for a moment? The broken shoulder that he suffered in the Seattle game at the very end of 2019, the one that we were there for.
Yeah, right.
The one that has bothered him since then.
For 3 years.
The one that he has not gotten surgery on. He's just toughed it through. And now that he's at a time when there's a discussion as to whether or not, trading, cutting, or whatever with him, and he decides now is the perfect time as opposed to the last 2 postseasons to go and get this surgery done.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to... Like, the Vikings were, for example, upset when Sidney Rice delayed his surgery until basically right before the season, right? I don't want to downplay the amount of pressure that players are under, even in the offseason, to make these kinds of decisions. And we get to a point where it is really concerning the way that we talk about players about, you have to do this medical procedure, right? Which we got kind of close to when we were talking about like the vaccine stuff, and people got really upset about that. But they don't get upset about getting mad about players. They get mad when you ask about the vaccine, but they don't get mad when you say, hey, that guy should have gotten a shoulder surgery 2 years ago, right? And so there's not like a lot of consistency here about players' autonomy over their medical decisions. But I think pointing that out aside, I do want to add that the decision to have a surgery or not have a surgery comes with a ton of team pressure in a way that like a vaccine kind of doesn't. Like there's a ton of team and league pressure on the vaccine, but it is about the team's ability to have you short-term versus the ability to have you long-term. Teams are always going to prioritize that short-term availability, and players can be pressured out of a surgery because of it, or teams can be more concerned about complications from a surgery and can pressure players out. And so like, or into a surgery, right? Teams can pressure players into a surgery when the player gets an understanding that a surgery might shorten their long-term career prospects because of the nature of the surgery, but make them more available because of an offseason. Like there's a lot of things here at play. Make it really difficult to fully evaluate what a player's options are available to them. And what a player gets told at the beginning of this medical process often can be different than what's at the end of the medical process, which I believe is actually what did happen with Sidney Rice, where at the beginning of the process, Sidney Rice was told, my understanding, to the best of my recollection, right, was told that there's a high likelihood that if he does not get surgery, he would not have to miss any time with training or with the team. And then as those months wore on, and the team wanted him to get a surgery because they had their own incentives to want him to make, but he wanted to make sure that entering a contract year, I think it was a contract year, he wanted to have the best season available to him, which means training, right? And the team wanted to make sure that he wasn't going to miss any time. And so they had 2 different types of incentives. But as he got better at a slow rate or didn't get better at all, surgery seemed like a better and better option as time went on. And that's why he got surgery late. That might be something with Dalvin Cook here, especially because obviously his shoulder would get worse over time as he takes hits as a running back in the NFL. That said, it is interesting what the timing is, right? Given that this is now the time that we have a discussion about Dalvin Cook's value, because the surgery tanks his trade value, right? Makes it more likely that he's going to play on the contract that he currently is on. And he's guaranteed like $8 million no matter what, right? So the team already thinks it's hard to cut him. Now it's going to be harder to trade him. So now he's more likely to play on his current contract. You can't ignore that dynamic or the fact that agents understand how these dynamics work. So, curious.
Yeah. Curious is the word for it. Ponderous, even. Real ponderous. Ingram's Left Foot also asks, now that Matty Matheson is a national spokesperson capable of landing a Super Bowl ad, what do you want to see him advertise next? I was thinking hearing aids.
That actually would be a killer commercial. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I think that's the next logical step.
Yeah.
Is
he was pretty restrained in his DoorDash commercial for him.
Yeah, for him, absolutely. Nothing was on fire or broken, or there was no tears or destroying rotten fruit that happened to still be on set for some reason.
No mics were blown out.
Nope.
That's
no cameras destroyed. I miss Just a Dash. He's got a show that he consistently does now, but like it's not Just a Dash.
It has a different energy, yeah, for sure.
And admittedly, when Michelle was brought on fairly recently, like that was kind of cool, but still, I miss Just a Dash. Matt McKeon asks, which Norse Code episodes would make the elite tier in an all-time episode tier ranking, not counting the clip shows? See, not counting the clip shows is going to be an interesting caveat here, but I think we both agree that one of the episodes that would have to be up there would be, it still counts because it wasn't a bonus episode technically. It wasn't a Patreon thing. Is the rewatching of the 2009 Saints game?
Yeah, we were talking about this and we went through like a couple, but like that to me is just like very clearly an S tier episode. We're never going to do a tier maker or a tier because there's like
why
465 episodes.
We will hit 500 this year.
Yeah, so we're not going to do a tier list of 500 different episodes. Nor am I going to remember. I don't know what I say in episodes I'm currently on.
Yeah,
right.
As was discovered with the name of the place that you were trying to defame for having bad labor practices.
Auntie May's Cake Emporium, which I had to make up a second name, and I was like Auntie something. Oh, the Spider-Man aunt.
Yeah, right. let's do that.
Yeah, that's going to be easy to remember. So I don't even remember the stuff I say 20 minutes ago. No way am I going to remember what happens in episode 410. And so we're not going to be able to do a great job of that, nor are we going to do it. But yeah, that one stands out to me as like a high tier episode. The Justice Senior Bowl episode was phenomenal.
Yes.
Reasons I'm not going to fully detail, but Justice was not completely present for the entirety or at all of our interview with him about draft prospects at the Senior Bowl. So that one was a great episode. And
of the recent ones, episode 435 is an instant classic for me. Because it involved the thing about the Queen, the line about the Queen and the Blitz.
Oh, that was such a good episode.
and bringing on Luke as a surprise that you had no idea was coming.
Both the same episode.
The first 25 minutes of that show, some of the best work we've ever done. Like, not even a question. Some of the best work that's ever been done in the history of Norse Code. That's an all-timer for that's an all-timer for me. There's obviously some of the 3-man pod episodes are fantastic. Those are just the two that stick out for us. The Logic Dump asks, for a Reeves Parenting Corner, since it seems that it is impossible for me to purchase a jersey online for my 3-year-old, either doesn't exist or out of relevant sizes, will my 3-year-old notice if I bought a discounted Lamar Jackson Ravens jersey? Instead, since he can't read yet, he just knows purple and skull.
This feels really wrong to me. But as the next question will kind of dig into further, kids are very much a make-do sort of thing. Like, you find a solution, right? But it does feel, from the outside looking in, having never raised a child, I don't like it. And it's definitely something that'll appear in like a wedding story or
things.
Like, the kid is going to tell stories about this, which if you're comfortable with that, that's fine, because the kid's going to tell embarrassing stories about you regardless, right? So that's I think that's rough. The baby onesie doesn't fit, but I would imagine there's something in the Norse Code store that would fit. Which is also purple.
Yeah, there absolutely are options at norsecode.threadless.com. But let's go to the next one, which is from Logan Bolsharif, who asks, for Reef's parenting corner, how do I get my newborn to take a bottle? The dummy absolutely refuses, and I am flummoxed.
The idiot refuses to eat.
Also, my 2-year-old my 2-year-old keeps throwing/dropping food on the floor. Besides chopping off his hands, what do I do to teach him not to do that?
That second question, I am lost. I 100% gone. I'm like, I don't know, man. that sounds like a problem. You're right.
You really do ride that one out. It's not fun. You really do. When object permanence becomes a concept that they are beginning to master, it really is the like, I'm done picking stuff up today sort of thing.
Right, that one, yeah. Okay. Well, I'm glad that the solution here from your experience is to ride that one out, because that's all I had in the holster.
Like, there's things you can do, but no, it's annoying as hell.
As for the newborn taking a bottle, here's my inventive solution I came up with on the spot that I'm sure James will have no objection to. This presupposes that the newborn is breastfeeding, so you have to bear with me. But if so, if not, how are you feeding it? I'm curious about that.
Yeah.
But like, if so, it just feels like so long as the bottle is as warm as a human body, which I know that's like a thing that people do, like they warm up bottles, yes. Right? You're like, yes, Arif, that's why are you even describing this as like a discovery? Right. Fair enough.
Cold milk, not good for them. They will reject it. Yes.
Yeah. Alternating between breastfeeding and the bottle during feeding, is that possible, James?
I don't know why you would.
Well, to get the kid used to a bottle.
Well, you wouldn't do it simply because it's kind of like if a kid falls asleep, you just let him go. Like the moment they just start eating, you're just like, nope, I'm not. Anybody who comes to the door, I will stab them. Just do not interrupt this. Kid'll eat to the point of falling asleep, and you just call it good. You just, nope, we're not gonna. Switching out will make them angry.
Okay, yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
Yeah.
That's knowledge born of experience, I imagine.
Yes, as it turns out.
Or like a microsecond of thinking, actually. Yeah. So
there you go.
Fair enough.
Like my kid was in the like when he was first born, refused to latch, would not latch, and just we had to trick him into eating. It was it's apparently not all that uncommon either, but it was terrifying to watch. So it was like he was not a very large child to begin with, and just like he was dwindling in the hospital, which is again a terrifying concept. Until we had to like trick him in some weird way. And then like the nurses, after we kept him an extra day, the nurses were all like, yeah, this is the way you're going to do it. And it's going to be all weird and everything. And we made it home and we tried it once and went, fuck this. No, no, we're going straight to the bottle and never looked back. And now he's an ox of a human being who can take me down at age 10. But like, kids are weird. It's not right. I wouldn't say more trouble than they're worth, but really the food thing was something that I was not expecting. Also for Arif Storm Corner, how does Arif rate Sam Ekstrom's preparedness for the coming storm? Will he survive the storm? And when did Sam come to first learn about the storm?
Did you see this, James?
I did not.
So right before our ad read, or I should say it is the ad read, I should say. So I usually check out during ad reads. I've never really been asked to do them. On the football machine, on the football party. It's always like, Sam, when we did ads way back, it was like Dusty that usually did it. And I might interact with him, but I was just like, I don't know anything about fantasy baseball, man.
Yeah.
Right.
I remember doing exactly one ad read.
Right. So I usually just check out, right? It's like, it's just not a thing that I've done or do, right? And it's not like a moral objection. You got to pay the bills, right? It's just like, people don't seem to want me to do them, and I'm comfortable with that. So Sam's doing the ad read, and he starts with the storm is coming. Right? Which if you're not familiar, so much internet lore here.
There's a lot of anonymous Q people.
Right. Well, I mean, we just say it. A QAnon thing is a storm is coming. Prepare for the storm. The storm is coming. And it can mean a lot of different things. Sometimes it means, like Robert Kennedy Jr. or something like that is about to announce his candidacy. He's dead, right? So he's going to announce his candidacy for the president. See, sure. I mean, yeah. Or it could just mean all the pedophiles in government are going to be wrapped up in announced and thrown in jail or whatever, right? Like it could mean any number of things, but it means that some QAnon level revelation is going to come to pass. Sam is not online enough to know these things. There are some times in the past where when he's tweeted out like a call for questions, he attaches a GIF, and I'm just like, hey, Sam, I know you don't know. This is not a criticism. This is just me asking you to delete a tweet and do it again. The person in that gift was outed as a white supremacist exactly a year ago to the day. We can't use that GIF. like even if it wasn't to the day, we would want to delete it. But this seems like a really bad time to tweet that. So let's just out that one. I know you don't know. Don't even have to apologize. Just get that one out of there. Sam's just not online enough for this sort of thing. And then he kept kind of using some QAnon phraseology without knowing. It was an advertisement for Built Bars. They sound nice. But he was talking about the actual winter storm, which if you're in Minnesota, that's all anybody's going to talk about for the next couple of days. And it's all they've talked about for the past couple of days. Or the past day. So we're going to get 20 inches in like 2 days or something like that. It's going to be awful. We're going to hate it. I'm probably going to get another ticket, even though my car's in a garage now. Every storm I've gotten a ticket somehow.
That is an impressive streak that you have to keep going here.
I paid $600 to get my car out of an impound lot. It just BS, man. Which I'm going to admit 80% my fault, and I'm still angry. But it became 100% my fault after I missed the court hearing to challenge it. It's the storm is coming stuff. I just bless his heart, man. Just Sam's trying his best.
just doing what he can. Well, let's get into some bee stuff here, because Eularon Bolsharif asks, for Reef's beekeeping corner, when feeding my bees during warm winter days, what can I do to avoid being defecated on? Is there a race of bees less prone to massive fecal buildup during the winter months?
Okay, so the reason this is coming up is because in the winter, bees will hold on to their feces until they can, like, the air is warm enough for them to fly, and then they'll just kind of let go. This, a normal part of the thing. Sometimes you can see it in the snow, like the little trails, like, oh, it's the bee poop trail, right? It's not bad. If it's yellow, that's a good sign. If it's black, that's a bad sign. But I don't think that you can avoid it. They're going to store it, and then on a warm day, if you're interacting with them, they're going to poop. The only thing I can think of to avoid it, and obviously this is built on years and years of bee experience,
and not spur of the moment Googling,
right? I would never, right? I would say probably before you engage in any maintenance over the hive, air out the hive, back away. Not fast. You don't want to alarm the bees, but back away. Let them release and then do your hive maintenance.
And that was another trip to Arif's beekeeping corner. Let's go to Room Bull Sharif, who asks, for Arif's Muppet Corner, do you love Cookie Monster, or did you turn on him when he called cookies a sometimes food?
The cookies aren't even close to my favorite dessert item. The cookies only come up because people keep on making spurious accusations about my relationship to one or more now companies that sell cookies. But I eat donuts way more than I eat cookies. And I don't even eat sweet stuff all that often, and ice cream way more than donuts. But like, it is a sometimes food for me. both the dessert category is a sometimes food, and cookies within that dessert category are a sometimes food. Cookie Monster does not have an enormous arsenal of takes, right? It's kind of a single track kind of person, and generally has not been right or wrong. The takes are just kind of what they are. But the sometimes food thing is the right take. Got to give him credit for that one.
Let's go to Bull Sharif Kyle Slaby, who asks, we all know that hate sells better than love. Famous example. James Stephanie Sterling always has an annual Best Video Games of the Year episode of the Jimquisition, which does significantly worse than the worst video game of the year. Algorithms can only be blamed for so much. I find that I've been watching a lot of dumb drama videos lately, breaking down flop video games or the toxic fan base or some negative story. I can't help myself, but I love a good debunking or venting video. Is this natural human experience, or learned societal preferences, and does it explain why I choose to root for the Vikings rather than become a fan of a normal and healthy team?
Okay, so couple of things here. One, I will not get into the nature versus nurture, or what an essential human nature is in terms of the types of entertainment we consume. First, because it is very difficult to define essential human nature outside of the experiences that form that human, which are built within a particular system that rewards or punishes certain behaviors that make us mistake certain understandings of the way society works as inherently human. It has taken anthropologists a very long time to get out of that, and it has made evolutionary psychology a very difficult field to be very certain about. I'm going to be careful here because I made fun of epigenetics and then got a bunch of pushback in the Discord. And it got resolved, right? Because I was like, look, the popular understanding of epigenetics is this thing. That's what we don't believe in. I was pretty careful in my language when I talked about epigenetics on the episode, where I said most categories of epigenetics we don't believe in. That is not me saying we don't believe in epigenetics, right? They're very real, and hopefully people in Ohio are not finding out exactly how real they are. But the popular understanding of epigenetics, not necessarily very real. Here, I will also say this about evolutionary psychology. And this I think more people will feel. I don't think I have to be as careful here, but I will be. Most popular understandings of evolutionary psychology and the conclusions that evolutionary psychologists or people who claim to be interested in evolutionary psychology, most of the conclusions that they come to are fake and bad science. It does not mean evolutionary psychology is not a good field, or it does not mean it is not a valid field that has a rich history to draw upon and a bunch of really great research being done in it. It might not. Don't know a ton about it, but most of it is bad. Our understanding of the way societies are constructed are built off of our current experiences, because we are also products of society. No scientist is independent, is built in a vacuum, independent of the society that produced them, right? So getting into what is a natural human experience and a natural inclination for a human versus a learned societal preference, that's a really tough one to get across, especially when it concerns something as societally baked in as media preferences and media consumption, right? A great example of this is beauty standards, which have changed substantially over the years. If we just take a look at Anglo-Saxon Western beauty standards going all the way back to, the 16th century or something like that, what would be beautiful now would be considered ugly then, and vice versa. Good examples of this would be the shape of your nose, your weight, your height, the state of your teeth. All of those things would be substantially different in terms of what's beautiful, and the things that we consider good, right? Like, people that we consider now to be skinny would not be considered attractive in the 17th century, right? So media consumption follows some of the very similar standards, but this discussion of a tendency to want to view negative stuff seems to be, I haven't done a study on this or read any studies on this, seems to be somewhat universal in our understanding of the way that humans have consumed media over the years. Maybe, maybe not. But I will say this is true across platforms. Now, it is not surprising to me that somebody who listens to this podcast also appreciates Jim Stephanie Sterling. Amazing YouTube channel. Kind of not as much about individual video games anymore and much more about the state of video games in general, which, spoiler alert to basically every Sterling video, it's bad. But this is true in sports, where we talk more about how to fix teams than what is making teams do well. I can see that in my own numbers, right? It's true in other types of media analysis. I don't watch any anime at all, famously. I've never even heard of it.
Famously, yes.
Right.
You never answer any questions on it either, with very weird specifics.
Right, exactly. But there's a YouTuber on their YouTube channel is Mother's Basement. His name is Jeff Thu. Again, I have not watched hours and hours and hours of Mother's Basement content. I wouldn't, because it's about anime. But I've gathered that it's an incredible channel that I would recommend if I was into that sort of thing. But his videos on the best trash of the season, which is more of a guilty pleasure type ranking, or the worst anime, do much better than the ones to watch or the best anime of a particular season. And his roasts videos, like when he just takes one anime and just shoves its face into the ground for like an hour and a half, those do incredibly well. His ones that celebrate anime that he thinks are good, or ones that do like investigative journalism, like he's got a series on an anime that's literally produced by a cult in order to spread cult propaganda. Really, again, I don't watch any of it, but if I did, I'd say it was a really great series. Doesn't get as much views as that other stuff. And this is true. Again, music, people watch teardowns of music that is popular rather than being interested in reasons why music is good. Cinema Sins does way better than Cinema Wins, right? Like, it's just, and I've learned a lot from the Cinema Wins channel. I don't like it just because it's not my style. I also don't like Cinema Sins. This has been like discussed a lot. So it's not like a preference of one or the other. It's just like a weird energy about Cinema Wins. But when I have watched it, I've learned a lot, which is really nice. But yeah, and I think there's a couple of things at play here. When we like something, we don't usually ask why, because nothing's wrong, right? Like, nothing has forced us to evaluate the situation that we're in and figure out why we've come here, right? Second, like, when we like something, we tend to think it's like for very personal reasons. I don't know if this is a societal construction thing or not, for very personal reasons. And it's just like, well, I like it, right? Whereas when we dislike something, it tends to be for fairly universal reasons. Like, they wrote this character poorly, or the shot composition is ugly. I can't see a movie in the theater because it's too dark, right? Like, these are, quote unquote objective, right? So that's part of it. And we're seeking an answer as to why. But like, another reason is because, and this is something that's been kind of true, I'm going to go all the way back to my debate background too. It's easier to tear down a wall than to build one up. And I don't mean that from like an effort perspective. I mean that from like a creativity perspective. It is intellectually easy to understand a flaw in an argument than it is to make an argument relatively bulletproof, especially on first appearance. So the same thing is true of like media, right? Like, if you say this character is written well, you have to go into a lot of things about what it means to write a good character. Whereas if you say this character is written poorly, he doesn't react like a real human reacts to stuff. Okay. I understand that you're essentially saying that for a character to be good, they have to realistically react to new situations, but that is not the totality of what makes a character good. That's just a requirement. this person doesn't meet that requirement, they're not a good character. So it's much easier to process this stuff. It's much easier to come up with this stuff. It's much easier to understand. We seek it out. I don't think it's necessarily an inbuilt or societally built movement towards negativity. These are just the ways that our pattern seeking, for whatever reason, forces us to explore. So that's my understanding of it. I would say that has nothing to do with your Vikings fandom. The Patriots have a ton of fans, so it cannot be because of seeking out negativity. Plus, I will say this: the opposite side of this is people love hearing before the season starts why their team will do well, and they love optimistic pieces. Those do better at the beginning of the season before the season starts than the negative pieces do. I will say that. So it's not universal.
Just as a side note, if you're interested in gaming YouTube, it's fairly old now, but the channel Hey Ash, what you playing?
Oh man, there's no way they're still going.
They're not, but the old episodes are so good. There's so many that are just so good out there.
Yeah, Ashley and Anthony Birch, I think.
Yes,
incredible stuff.
Let's see. Dusty is going to end it. No, Dusty actually does not end it this week, but we're going to come close here. Dusty, how many first-round draft picks for Lamar Jackson is too many?
Probably 4.
I mean, this is coming from a Denver Broncos fan who's desperate to get rid of Russell Wilson.
Well, if you're going to package Russell Wilson in there, you're going to have to probably throw in another first-round pick.
Yeah, that's kind of how that's going to work. For Arif's beekeeping/therapy corner, in the animated film Bee Movie, the main character begins a romantic relationship with a bee who gaslights her into suing humanity. Which is
hold on. Is the main character not the bee? Is the main character the human?
I haven't watched it.
I clearly don't know. But that kind of threw me for. Okay, yeah, keep going.
Which is more disconcerting? The use of smoke to incapacitate a hive, the use of the legal system to incapacitate the world's flower production, or entering a romantic relationship with a bee?
Okay. Viscerally, the last one. That's screwed up. Societally, the flower one, that's gonna kill everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Including, I understand, if we're talking about this like it's a labor strike, we have to, pay attention that the impact that people make is really important, and that the labor strike reinforces the centrality of labor to the way society functions. And having a labor strike that disrupts essential services, not like emergency services, reinforces again how important labor. I'm not disregarding that, but the use of the legal system to incapacitate the world's flower production seems like a lot. But again, in the world of the Bee Movie, the bees are sentient. That's not the case in reality, which I'm going to say that's an official stance. Not only are the bees sentient, they're sapient, right? They have the capacity to make decisions in ways that they can regret. They can change their mind. They can evaluate their decisions, analyze them. They are essentially humans from a cognitive standpoint, which I guess would make the romantic relationship with a bee less disconcerting, but I can't get over the icky feels that internally my body is producing, having said that aloud again. But that in that world, yeah, that's a reasonable response for bees. I assume that they're being exploited, right? In this case, the bees are really getting the short end of the stick, and so they have threatened to stop flowers, the concept of them, period. And okay, yeah, fine. Without that, though, without the bees having an innate access to rights, no, that's screwed up. I guess in order to gaslight somebody and manipulate them, you have to have a level of sapience that would make the other things more reasonable. And then the smoking out that's screwed up if they're sapient, right? That's messed up. You can't just drug people, anticipating that they'll be aggressive.
Well, let's end this today with North Code, who asks, for North Code, similar to Arif's hatred of Canada, forming after spending a prolonged amount of time in it, I am also finding it hard to like America after my recent stay of nearly 3 weeks. Can Arif state why America is so much better than Canada?
Oh, because I have taste. You clearly don't. And having grown up in Canada, I can understand why. I mean, this is like a societal thing, right? This is goes back to the nature nurture thing. You've been raised in a society that does not value good things and values bad things. And that's why you're wrong. I am hermetically sealed from this, and as an outside observer of both societies, having never been touched by societal influence, I can say with complete objectivity that that's a flaw that you have that I don't have, or that Americans have generally. America is better, and their food is better, which is not always the case when compared to other countries.
Boy, I wasn't expecting to have you go on a rant like that, but that is how
Go
we're gonna
USA.
end.
If you want to be cured of the Go USA stuff, please subscribe to our Patreon and listen to the most recent episode.
Well, welcome. Wow. All right, we're gonna hit eject here. That has been this episode of Norse Code. Hope you guys have enjoyed it. Arif, what do you have to plug?
Not much. Still, head over to profootballnetwork.com/author/ASN, where I'll be publishing a number of articles in the coming weeks. So primarily my job right now is to write articles in anticipation of free agency. So a lot of the pieces I'm writing right now will not be published until like March, right? And mid-March at that. But I will be headed over to the Combine. I've got a lot of Combine stories kind of circulating about the new head coaches, about the quarterbacks in the class, about, the way the general managers are approaching the Combine this year. So that's gonna be. But my most recent article is actually one that has gotten a lot of play in both Washington and Kansas City. And I really appreciate that. They seem to like it. It's about what an Eric Bieniemy-led Washington Commanders offense would look like. I also recorded like a 1-minute video that I'm not going to say went viral. It certainly didn't go viral, but it had like 15,000 views, and a lot of people commented on it because I haven't spoken very quickly in a very long time. And most people who follow the Pro Football Network account are not familiar with me, or that I had that capability. And I spoke quite fast, and there was a debate about whether or not it was sped up to 1.5 times speed, 2 times speed, or if I can just talk that fast. And for the record, yeah, I could just talk that fast.
Well, that's going to be it for this episode of Norse Code. Again, hope you guys have enjoyed it. For Arif, my name is James. Thank you guys so much for listening, and please remember that this is not sustainable. We'll see you in about 2 weeks. Norse Code is the largest and only division of Norse Code LLC. You can find Norse Code on the Daily Norseman, SB Nation's Vikings blog, at dailynorseman.com. You can also find it on iTunes, Apple Podcast, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, and wherever fine podcasts are aggregated. Our Vikings blogger extraordinaire and generally useful human is Arif Hassan of Pro Football Network, and he can be found at Arif Hassan NFL. I am your producer and host, and my name is James Pagashnik. You can find me at the show's official Twitter feed at NorseCodeDN, or my personal account at Big Mono. If you'd like to donate a few bucks to the show, you can do so in a few different ways. You can go to patreon.com/NorseCode and donate there. For $3.50 a month, you get bonus material and more. You can also go to paypal.me/NorseCode for a one-time donation, or you can go to norsecode.threadless.com and pick up some Norse Code merchandise. Any questions or comments that cannot fit in a tweet can be sent to norsecodepodcast@gmail.com. On behalf of the Norse Code staff, thank you so much for listening.
Our formula is this.
All things are possible through the power of Ben DiNucci.